Have you ever wondered if the greatest medical discovery isn't hidden inside a laboratory, but growing quietly in your own backyard? When retired botanist Nathan Walker returned to his family's abandoned farm in the Blue Ridge Mountains, he planned to destroy every weed covering the land. But an old journal left behind by his grandfather stopped him. Inside were forgotten notes about 12 ordinary plants that modern science is only beginning to understand. As the town laughed at his overgrown garden, Nathan uncovered a secret that could change the way we see medicine forever. A cold spring rain drifted across the rolling hills of Blue Ridge, North Carolina. Mist clung to the old fences while waist-high weeds swayed across forgotten fields beneath a gray morning sky. Nathan Walker stood quietly beside the rusted entrance gate, his weathered boots sinking into the damp earth he had not touched in more than 3 decades. At 61, he carried himself with the calm posture of a man who had spent a lifetime inside universities instead of fields. He was 6 feet tall, lean from years of hiking through forests during botanical expeditions, with silver hair brushed neatly backward and a short gray beard framing a sharp, thoughtful jaw. His steel blue eyes rarely revealed emotion, yet they constantly observed every detail around him. Former students had often described him as brilliant but distant. Nathan never intended to become cold. Years devoted to research had simply taught him to trust evidence more than feelings. The death of his wife from an aggressive bacterial infection 8 years earlier had only hardened that belief. Watching modern medicine fail the person he loved most had left a wound he never spoke about, burying himself even deeper in science, as if every published paper could somehow answer the questions grief never stopped asking. The farm before him had once belonged to 3 generations of the Walker family. As a child, Nathan remembered chasing butterflies through these same fields while his grandfather patiently explained the names of wildflowers that everyone else ignored. Later, those memories faded beneath lectures, laboratories, conferences, and a successful academic career in Boston. When his aging father insisted on staying alone at the farm, Nathan visited less and less, convincing himself there would always be another summer. There wasn't. 3 weeks earlier, his father had quietly passed away in his sleep, leaving Nathan the only surviving heir to the property. Every lawyer, realtor, and financial advisor had offered identical advice. Sell it. The old farmhouse leaned slightly from decades of storms. The wooden barn roof sagged under moss. Broken fences disappeared beneath thick carpets of green weeds stretching in every direction. To Nathan, the land looked less like a family legacy and more like years of expensive neglect waiting for a bulldozer. He unlocked the front door, releasing the scent of aged pine, dust, and forgotten seasons. Every room remained almost exactly as he remembered. His father's reading glasses still rested beside an empty coffee mug. An old rocking chair faced the silent fireplace. Nothing inside suggested life had ended here. It felt as though the house had simply been waiting. Nathan spent hours sorting boxes, stacking old photographs and worn farming tools into neat piles destined for donation or disposal. Efficiency always helped him avoid emotion. Late in the afternoon, while clearing the attic, he noticed a narrow cedar chest hidden beneath faded quilts. Its brass latch had turned green with age. Inside lay yellowed letters tied with twine, several dried plant specimens pressed between brittle sheets of paper, and a thick leather notebook whose cracked cover bore a single faded name. Elias Walker, Nathan's grandfather. He remembered Elias only through scattered childhood images. A broad-shouldered mountain man with thick white eyebrows, sun-darkened skin, rough calloused hands, and kind hazel eyes that somehow made frightened children feel safe. Neighbors had traveled for miles seeking his herbal remedies long before modern clinics reached the mountains. Nathan had admired him as a boy, but as a scientist, he eventually dismissed those stories as colorful folklore. Curiosity outweighed skepticism. He brushed away decades of dust and slowly opened the notebook. Each page contained remarkably detailed sketches of common weeds growing around the farm, accompanied by careful notes describing where they flourished, when they should be harvested, and how generations before had prepared them. Nathan couldn't help smiling to himself. Beautiful drawings, he murmured. Terrible science. He nearly closed the journal. Then his eyes fell upon the final handwritten sentence, darker than every other line, as though written with unusual determination. The day medicine can no longer save mankind. They will return to the plants they once pulled from the ground without a second thought. Nathan stared at the words far longer than he expected. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the attic window while the endless sea of weeds rippled across the old fields below. For the first time since arriving, selling the farm no longer felt like the only sensible decision. Perhaps just a few more weeks. Perhaps one careful investigation before saying goodbye forever. The following morning, the rain eased into a fine mist, leaving every blade of grass sparkling beneath a pale sky, while the abandoned fields breathed with the quiet freshness only early spring could bring. Nathan carried his grandfather's journal beneath one arm as he stepped into the overgrown pasture. Instead of seeing weeds, he now saw names. Every few yards he stopped, comparing the handwritten sketches to the living plants around him. To his surprise, the notebook was astonishingly accurate. Plantains spread along the gravel driveway exactly where Elias had predicted. Chickweed flourished beneath the shadow of the old apple trees. Dandelions crowded the open pasture, while creeping Charlie crept beneath broken fence rails like an unstoppable green tide. Nathan knelt repeatedly, photographing leaves, measuring soil moisture, recording temperatures, and collecting tiny samples inside labeled paper envelopes. The disciplined habits developed during 40 years of scientific research returned naturally, replacing emotion with careful observation. Each evening, he compared his grandfather's notes with recent publications from botanical journals stored on his laptop. Page after page, he discovered studies from universities in Canada, Germany, Japan, and the United States describing antibacterial compounds hidden inside many of the same plants Elias had written about decades earlier. The old notebook contained no chemistry formulas or laboratory data, yet its practical observations often matched modern findings with unsettling precision. Nathan still refused to believe the journal represented forgotten miracles, but he could no longer dismiss it as superstition. Something genuine connected generations of careful observation with modern science. Within a week, the neglected farm began attracting attention. One afternoon, an elderly pickup truck stopped beside the fence. Behind the wheel sat Harold Benson, a broad-shouldered 70-year-old cattle farmer whose deeply lined face and thick white mustache reflected decades beneath the Carolina sun. Harold spoke loudly, laughed easily, and valued practical experience above education. Having survived countless financial hardships and several devastating droughts, he believed every problem could be solved with hard work and a bottle of herbicide. "Nathan," Harold shouted with a grin, "you planning to start charging admission to the county's ugliest weed collection?" Nathan smiled politely. "I'm studying them." Harold burst into laughter. "Studying weeds? Son, those things steal nutrients, choke grass, and invite snakes. I'd spray every inch before breakfast." Nathan simply thanked him for the advice. By the following weekend, more neighbors slowed their trucks whenever they passed the farm. Some pointed toward the fields while laughing. Others jokingly referred to the property as the weed junkyard. The nickname spread through Asheville County faster than Nathan expected. Even local teenagers occasionally stopped to take photographs beside the overgrown entrance before driving away, amused by the retired professor who appeared determined to preserve every unwanted plant in North Carolina. The attention never bothered Nathan. If anything, it gave him more freedom. Nobody expected serious discoveries from a man protecting weeds. Each morning began before sunrise. He carefully transplanted specimens into organized garden plots, documented their growth, dried leaf samples under controlled temperatures, and recorded every observation inside a new research notebook. He never recommended the plants as medicine, never suggested replacing doctors or prescriptions. His only goal was understanding why ancient descriptions continued to echo inside modern scientific literature. Late one evening, as rain once again tapped softly against the farmhouse windows, Nathan placed his grandfather's weathered journal beside his own freshly written notebook. For the first time, both books contained matching observations recorded nearly 70 years apart. He quietly realized he was no longer preserving an old family story. He was continuing it. Summer arrived with heavy humidity across Blue Ridge, North Carolina. Afternoon thunderstorms rolled over the mountains almost daily, leaving the forest steaming beneath dark clouds while the scent of wet earth drifted through the valleys. By early July, Nathan's notebooks had multiplied across the farmhouse dining table. Every page contained measurements, harvest dates, photographs, chemical references, and comparisons between his grandfather's observations and recently published scientific papers. The deeper he investigated, the more convinced he became that ancient herbal knowledge deserved careful scientific examination rather than blind belief or immediate rejection. He refused every suggestion to label the plants as miracle cures. Evidence came first. It always had. Only 20 miles away, Blue Ridge Regional Hospital was facing one of its most frustrating summers in recent memory. Several patients with persistent bacterial infections responded poorly to standard treatments, forcing physicians to consult infectious disease specialists more frequently than usual. Although no public emergency had been declared, medical staff quietly recognized that antibiotic resistance was becoming an increasingly difficult challenge. Among those physicians was Dr. Emily Carter, a 34-year-old infectious disease specialist whose reputation had grown quickly despite her young age. Emily stood just under 5 feet 8, with an athletic build shaped by years of marathon running, chestnut brown hair usually tied into a practical ponytail, and alert green eyes that rarely overlooked small details. Her fair skin contrasted with the dark circles beneath her eyes, earned from countless overnight hospital shifts. Emily believed deeply in evidence-based medicine. During medical school, she had watched her own father waste thousands of dollars pursuing and proven alternative remedies after his cancer diagnosis. That painful experience had made her skeptical of anyone claiming nature possessed magical cures. One quiet evening, she noticed a short article buried near the back page of the Asheville County newspaper. Retired professor preserves backyard weeds instead of destroying them. Normally, she would have ignored it. Instead, curiosity won. The following Saturday, she drove to the Walker farm expecting to meet another enthusiastic herbal salesman. She found the exact opposite. Nathan never offered herbal treatments. He never claimed anyone should replace prescribed medicine with wild plants. Instead, he invited Emily into his study, where stacks of peer-reviewed journals covered nearly every available surface. Without hesitation, he handed her both his own research notebooks and Elias Walker's aging journal. "I don't want belief," Nathan said calmly. "I want someone willing to verify whether these observations deserve further study." Emily spent nearly 4 hours turning page after page. Traditional harvesting methods, modern laboratory references, chemical pathways, university publications from Europe, Asia, and North America. Nothing had been exaggerated. Everything was carefully documented. Over the following weeks, the retired botanist and the young physician began meeting almost every afternoon. Nathan identified plants and explained generations of field observations. Emily searched international medical databases, comparing documented plant compounds with ongoing pharmaceutical research. Together, they analyzed dozens of native species growing naturally across the neglected farm. Again and again, Emily encountered the same surprising pattern. Compounds once dismissed as belonging to ordinary weeds were quietly being investigated by respected laboratories around the world for their antibacterial properties. Driving home after another long afternoon, Emily glanced toward the mountains surrounding the Walker farm. For the first time in her medical career, she wondered whether forgotten knowledge and modern science had been walking toward each other all along. By late summer, warm rainstorms still swept across the Blue Ridge Mountains almost every evening, feeding the fields until Nathan's once-forgotten garden had become greener than anyone in Asheville County could remember. What began as quiet research no longer remained a local curiosity. A regional newspaper published a feature about the retired botanist and the young physician comparing Appalachian herbal records with modern antimicrobial studies. The article spread online far beyond North Carolina. University professors sent emails requesting copies of Nathan's observations. Graduate students asked permission to visit the farm. Nathan politely answered every message with the same reminder. These plants deserve scientific study, not blind faith. Then the unexpected offer arrived. A black luxury SUV rolled slowly into the gravel driveway one humid afternoon. From the passenger seat stepped Richard Coleman, a sharply dressed man in his early 50s with neatly combed silver-black hair, clean-shaven features, and calm brown eyes that rarely betrayed emotion. His tailored charcoal suit looked strangely out of place beside the muddy fields. Richard spoke softly, choosing every word with practiced precision. Years negotiating corporate acquisitions had taught him that persuasion often succeeded where pressure failed. Representing Green Shield Agricultural Solutions, one of the country's largest manufacturers of lawn herbicides, Richard unfolded architectural drawings across Nathan's kitchen table. The company wanted the entire Walker property. The proposed purchase price was nearly 5 times the farm's market value. Their plan was to construct a regional research and manufacturing facility for weed control products. Richard smiled confidently. "You've spent months studying weeds, Professor Walker. Imagine what you could accomplish with unlimited funding." Nathan remained silent for several seconds before gently folding the documents closed. "My grandfather protected this land." He looked through the rain-speckled window toward the fields. "I'm not selling it." Richard accepted the refusal with remarkable politeness, shook Nathan's hand, and drove away without another argument. 3 nights later, disaster arrived. Nathan awoke shortly after midnight when the sound of splintering would echoed from outside. By the time he reached the garden with a flashlight, rows of carefully labeled research plots had been torn apart. Empty planting trays lay scattered across the mud. Hundreds of living specimens had disappeared. Storage cabinets stood open. Soil samples had been dumped across the ground. Nathan rushed into the farmhouse. His desk drawers had been emptied. Elias Walker's original journal was gone. For several minutes he simply stood there, unable to speak. The loss felt strangely personal, as though another member of his family had vanished. When Emily arrived before sunrise, she immediately understood what had happened. After helping Nathan inspect the damage, she quietly opened her laptop. "I never told you," she said softly, "because I didn't think we'd ever need it." She opened a folder containing thousands of scanned pages. Months earlier, she had carefully digitized every page of Elias's journal, every research notebook Nathan had written, every photograph, every field map, and every laboratory reference they had collected together. Nothing essential had been lost. Nathan stared at the glowing screen before slowly smiling through tired eyes. At that moment, he understood something his grandfather had probably known all along. Knowledge survives best when it no longer belongs to only one person. 1 year later, another cold spring rain settled gently over the Blue Ridge Mountains, covering the hills in soft mist while thousands of native wild plants stretched across the valley where abandoned weeds had once stood unnoticed. The old Walker farm no longer resembled the forgotten property Nathan had almost sold. The weathered barn had been carefully restored into classrooms and research laboratories, while the surrounding fields had become carefully organized conservation gardens. A wooden sign at the entrance now read, "Blue Ridge Native Plant Research Center." Every week, university students, physicians, botanists, and environmental researchers arrived from across the United States, not searching for miracle cures, but hoping to better understand the relationship between traditional knowledge and modern science. Nathan Walker looked older than he had a year before. His silver beard had grown slightly fuller, and the lines around his thoughtful blue eyes had deepened, yet there was a quiet peace in his face that grief had never allowed before. For decades, he had measured success through published papers and academic recognition. Now he found greater satisfaction watching young researchers kneel in muddy fields, asking questions instead of making assumptions. Dr. Emily Carter had become the center's scientific coordinator, balancing hospital work with collaborative research projects. Her skepticism had never disappeared, but it had matured into something more valuable, open-minded discipline. She insisted every claim be tested, every observation documented, and every conclusion reviewed by independent experts. Nathan admired that she had never abandoned science. She had simply expanded its conversation. One afternoon, a group of visiting medical students gathered beneath the old oak tree where Nathan often held informal discussions. One student asked the question he had heard countless times. "So, do you believe these plants can replace antibiotics?" Nathan smiled gently before answering. "No." The students looked surprised. "Nature is not here to replace physicians," he continued. "It is here to inspire better questions. Every medicine begins with curiosity. Sometimes the next answer grows in places we've spent years trying to destroy." Silence settled over the group as rain softly tapped against the leaves above them. Beyond the classroom, Butterflies floated between blooming plantain, yarrow, chickweed, and dozens of other species once dismissed as worthless weeds. Local farmers who had once laughed at Nathan now planted protected native gardens instead of spraying every patch of wild growth. Even Harold Benson had set aside a small corner of his pasture where native plants were allowed to flourish undisturbed. As the afternoon faded, Nathan walked alone toward the same attic window where he had first opened his grandfather's journal. The original notebook had never been recovered, yet its wisdom had reached hundreds of people through research, education, and honest scientific inquiry. Standing quietly above the fields, Nathan finally understood the true inheritance Elias Walker had left behind. Not a garden, not a notebook, but the courage to remain curious, and the humility to believe that even the smallest overlooked things may one day help shape the future. Sometimes, God's greatest miracles don't arrive as sudden cures or extraordinary signs. Sometimes, He quietly plants answers in the ordinary things we walk past every single day, waiting for us to notice them with humble hearts. Nathan's journey reminds us that wisdom often begins with curiosity, faith, and the courage to keep learning. In our own lives, we may overlook people, moments, or blessings simply because they seem too ordinary to matter. Yet those hidden gifts can become the very answers we've been praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who could use a little hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you enjoy inspiring stories that celebrate faith, nature, and compassion, don't forget to subscribe and join our community. May God bless you, protect your family, and fill your heart with peace, wisdom, and hope. Amen.